Hey guys, welcome to Motoroids. My name is Amit and this, the Royal Enfield Classic 350, is probably the most iconic motorcycles of our times. So when Royal Enfield decide to overhaul it, they would better do it well because this is too big a game to screw with. But since they had decided to overhaul it, they have overhauled it completely, and on this motorcycle there is hardly anything that has been carried over from its previous iteration. Now I know that it looks exactly the way it looked in its previous iteration in a lot of ways, but trust me it's an all new motorcycle. In traditional Motoroids style, I am going to give you every single detail of this motorcycle today. So if you want to know everything about it, grab some popcorns, get your drinks, and let's get started. Now before we start with what's different, let's start with what's the same. And looking at this motorcycle in profile should tell you that Royal Enfield did not want to tinker around with the design much, and it's very reminiscent of the classic 350 that it replaces. The dimensions are more or less the same, the wheelbase is exactly the same, even the weight, despite this being a newer motorcycle, is almost the same at 195 kgs. What has changed though is that the rider triangle, despite looking exactly the same, is very slightly different, and the handlebar has been pushed slightly forward. But within that angle, the position of the foot pegs and the seat is still the same. 805 mm of seat height, which means that even the shorter ones amongst you would be able to ride it without much of a problem. If you are 5 feet 5 or 5 feet 6, should not be an issue at all. The weight is a problem. Another thing, these foot pegs, they do tend to foul with your shins sometimes, so that is a bit of an issue. Now while this is not very evident, the ground clearance has also been extensively worked upon, and now it's significantly higher at 170 mm as against the 135 mm clearance of the previous generation Classic 350. Now this design may look exactly the same, but the panels have been completely remachined. These are not the same panels. They are exactly the same and yet completely different. They are of a higher quality, and all of these panels have been completely remachined, although they are exactly the same in a lot of ways. The exhaust is new, the chassis is new, the engine is new, and the wheels, while they may look similar, are new. The tires are wider, the rear tire is wider, and a whole bunch of this has been taken from the Meteor. As you would imagine, the Meteor is a very capable motorcycle. It pushes Royal Enfield into a more modern era, and while the engine, the chassis, the swing arm, the brakes and the handlebar switches are taken from the Meteor, a whole bunch of things are all new, including the wheels, the suspension, the fuel tank, the seat, mudguard, side panels, the lighting nacelle, handlebars, foot controls, the instrument console, and the exhaust system. Yes, you heard it right. This is different, this is all new, and since this is something which a lot of RE buyers are emotionally attached with, without any ado, let me fire this motorcycle up and let you listen to this exhaust. Now, one has to admit this is not as deep and as bassy as the exhaust that it replaces, but it still has that characteristic signature Royal Enfield beat to it, and it definitely is throatier, deeper than the Meteor, and I quite like it. When you're riding it at low to mid revs, it really sounds very beautiful, and the lovers of this brand are not going to miss the thump of the Royal Enfield. Let's talk about the changes now. The wheels here are wider, and I talk about wheels, not just the tires. The earlier Classic 350 had 1.85 into 19 wheels. Now they are 2.15 into 19. The tire size has increased from 90/90/19 to 190/19 up front, and at the rear the wheel size has increased from 2.5 into 18 to 3.0 into 18, while the tire width has increased from 110/90/18 to 120/80/18 section. This motorcycle will be available both in spoke wheels and alloy wheels depending on the model that you go for, and you can also go for the alloy wheels as an accessory, which I'll come to in a little bit. Now, these tires are Zoom Plus, and so far so good. The Seat Zoom Plus tires that are fitted on this motorcycle were reasonably reassuring, not the best tires, but with the increased width, I can tell you that in its new avatar, the RE350 gives you a lot more confidence while you're leaned over, or even while you're accelerating hard or braking hard, which again brings me to these new brakes. And these brakes are now bigger. Not just is the disc size bigger, it's now 300 mm as opposed to the 280 mm disc on the previous Classic 350, but the pistons here are also bigger with a 28 mm size. The previous motorcycle had a 26 mm twin piston setup. Here you have a 28 mm twin piston setup. The rear brakes are also bigger, and they are now 270 mm as opposed to the 240 mm discs on the previous motorcycle, and the piston size has increased from 32 mm to 34 mm. According to Royal Enfield, now the braking distance from 100 km per hour has decreased from 55 meters to 43 meters. And not just that, the ABS system, the dual channel ABS system that comes on this motorcycle has also been completely reworked, and it's obviously similar to the Meteor, but it's not the same ABS system which was available on the earlier Classic 350. So braking has improved dramatically, I can tell you that. While the previous motorcycle did not have very reassuring brakes, this one is far superior. Now let's also talk about the new set of suspension here, and suspension has also been worked upon. The forks are now of a wider dia, and while they were earlier 35 mm, now they are 41 mm. So Meteor forks, which means more stability and more reassuring handling around bends. The travel here is the same as before at 130 mm. However, at the rear, the suspension has again been given an overhaul, and these dual rated springs now have a longer travel of 90 mm as opposed to the 80 mm travel on the previous motorcycle. So all in all, a lot of work has gone into the dynamics of this motorcycle, the suspension, the handling, and of course a very important part of that is chassis. And this chassis, as you can see, a dual cradle frame has been taken from the Meteor, and as you can see here, the engine is indeed a stressed member. However, it's a dual cradle frame and it's very stable. It's very rigid, and we tested this frame very extensively on the Meteor, and I can tell you that this motorcycle handles nothing like the Classic 350 that you know, and it's far superior, not just in a straight line, while under braking or around corners. In any scenario, this motorcycle is a different beast altogether, and all the flaws that were there with the Classic 350 have been removed very well. It's a very nice handling motorcycle, and now you can actually show it a set of bends, and this motorcycle is not going to disappoint you, well, relatively speaking. All right, then let's start talking about some of the finer details that I'm sure you would be interested in. And as you can see, the headlight here is not exactly the same, although it looks similar. It has the familiar pilot units. The blinkers here are bulbs, no LED units. Even the headlamp is not an LED unit. However, it's an AHO, as you can see. So as soon as you twist the ignition, the light comes on, and there's no way you can turn it off. However, if the side stand is on and you put the bike in gear, it's going to shut down to prevent any inadvertent movement. This thing here obviously is metal. You cannot have any plastic on the Classic. Royal Enfield are not going to make that mistake. So stay assured that has not happened. This hood right here is done in that classic styling. And now, since I'm talking about the details, it's a good time to tell you that this motorcycle is available in 5 different variants which you can choose from, and within every variant you have different colors to choose from. So let's see the variants that we have here. So to start off, we have the reddish variant with 2 colors, we have a Halcyon with 3 colors, we have the Signals with 2 colors, we have the Dark Edition with 2 colors, and this one here, which is the Chrome, again in 2 colors. Now, since I'm talking about the Chrome variant, an important thing to know is that this stripper that you see here is still an accessory and available only with the Chrome variant and not with the other variants. However, at a later point in time, this stripper will be available as an accessory on other variants as well. And the stripper, we know, can be paired with your phone for navigation, for calls and whatnot, and we have seen this on the Meteor before. And since we are taking a peek at the instrument console, let's have a look at what all we have here. So very classic speedo with kilometers and miles, low battery indicator, ABS indicator and engine malfunction. Low fuel light is there, and you have turn indicators, high and low beam and neutral indicator. Apart from that, you also have this little digital unit, and finally the Classic now has a fuel gauge, so that's a big relief. And this here is a little button that you can use to control what you see there, and as you can see, as I press it, you can see that there is an odo, there is trip 1, there is trip 2, there is a fuel trip, low fuel trip, you have a clock, and as you can see, there is an eco readout here, which means that if you're riding gingerly and saving fuel, this eco notification is going to be there. If you ring the throttle, it's going to go away. About the key, this here is the key, and here you have ignition on and off and push to lock for the handle. The handlebar is chrome, and the switch gear has been taken from the Meteor. So you have the engine kill and ignition, then you have this button for hazards, and here you have the horn, high beam and low beam. You can flick this switch like so to engage the day flasher, and then you have the turn indicators. All of this has been very well built, and this is very unlike the previous Classic, where we did find a lot of parts not very well finished. So the fit and finish here is top notch, and I really don't have any complaints. Although the paint on this motorcycle and the chrome is still shared with the paint and the chrome on the previous RE350, so no significant improvement has been made there, but that significant improvement in the paint shop was already made. So that enhancement has been there for some time now. The quality of the levers is fantastic, the rubber grips are amazing, and even the clutch is not too heavy. So if you're riding this motorcycle within the city, your hands are not going to ache. As you can see here, these mirrors are very classically styled and they are very sturdy. You can change them according to what your height is and what your riding position is, and they give you a fair view of what's coming from behind, although I would have liked had these been a little wider, but they're not completely useless. They give you a decent view of what's coming from behind. Now the fuel lid here is hinged, and it's a 13-liter tank as opposed to the 13.5-liter tank on the previous generation motorcycle. You have this cover for the key, and the fuel efficiency, as stated, is 37 kilometers to the liter officially. You would easily get 40 kilometers to the liter if you're riding it without ringing the right throttle too much. This motorcycle is going to give you a good fuel efficiency. Even if you're riding it hard, you should be able to get upwards of 30 kilometers to the liter. That should not be a problem. So in terms of fuel efficiency, this motorcycle should match the fuel efficiency of the Meteor. However, this engine is not exactly the same as the Meteor. It's been remapped for a more laid back kind of riding. So the map is a little different. Also, while the gear ratios are the same, the rear wheel size is different, so that has its own bearings on how this motorcycle performs, and I'm going to let you know everything about it. But before that, let's cover the other things as well. Of course, it comes with a main stand, so you can engage the main stand. The tail light has been redesigned here. It's not an LED unit, and nor are the blinkers. Now, since we are talking about lights and wrapping that topic up, let me tell you that the electrical system here is a 12 volt DC system with a 12 volt 8 ampere hour battery, which is maintenance free. Headlamp is a 12 volt 60/45 watt halogen, and the tail lamp is a 12 volt P21 5 watt unit. And the headlamp here is reasonably bright. The spread is good, the throw is good. It's not the best, but it's sufficient, and it should light your way up on the highways or while you're riding in the city without much of an issue. Now, since this is the chrome variant, you obviously have tons and tons of chrome, and it really is very high quality chrome. You have chrome fenders, chrome tank, chrome exhaust, and this buffed side of the engine. The engine on top is silver and black. All in all, it comes together very well, and this classic styling is something which is very iconic, and I'm very glad that Royal Enfield have not fiddled around it too much. Now let's start talking about the aspect that I'm pretty sure a lot of you are the most interested in, and that's the performance. And right off the bat, this engine is the same as the Meteor. The gear ratios are the same as the Meteor. So in essence, the performance is not very different. However, as I mentioned before, the mapping here is a little different. The ignition and the fueling is a little different, and all of that is designed to give it a more classic kind of a drive experience. The throttle response is a little bit laid back. It's not as crisp as the Meteor. The engine on the Meteor also somehow feels more intent. It feels a little bit more energetic. This one feels a little bit more laid back, and apart from that, a big difference is the fact that this motorcycle comes with an 18-incher at the rear, while the Meteor comes with a 17, and it has bearings on the way these two motorcycles perform, and that difference can be seen in the gear speeds of the two motorcycles. So when I tested the Meteor, I noticed the speeds, and in the first gear that motorcycle went up to 50, in second to 75, in third to 99, in the fourth gear it went to 122, which again was its top speed, because in the fifth, which was an overdrive, it did not quite reach its top speed on the speedo. This motorcycle here gives you slightly better speeds in the lower gears, and if you compare it with the Meteor, in the first gear it's slightly higher up at 54, in the second gear it reaches about 80 at 79, and in the third gear, while the Meteor was not able to cross 100, this crosses 100 and goes to 102 kilometers. The difference is not much, but it's about the way it reaches those speeds, and it's not as intent in reaching those speeds. In fact, in fourth gear there is a marked difference in the way the two motorcycles perform, and this one seems slightly lazier, while the Meteor feels a little bit more intent. So in terms of the peppiness and the readiness and the intent to accelerate, I would think that the Meteor feels a little bit more intent, but this motorcycle, true to its tradition, feels a little bit lazy. It feels a little bit more torquier, and in some ways tries to give you the kind of experience that you're used to on the classic 350. And while the engine is the same, the experience on the two motorcycles is slightly different, and it's quite evident when you ride the two motorcycles back to back. As was the case with the Meteor, the engine here is very linear. There is tons and tons of torque available from the bottom of the rev range, and you really don't have to rev this motorcycle to keep it going. And this in fact is more tractable than the Meteor. In fifth gear you can actually use this motorcycle at speeds as low as 30 to 35 kilometers per hour. It won't stall. The Meteor's operating speed at that gear was 40 kilometers per hour, which is slightly higher. In low gears also, the tractability of this motorcycle is slightly better, and in fourth gear you can feel this motorcycle moving from 30 kilometers per hour. In third gear it keeps moving at sub 20 kilometers per hour speed, which is crazy. And the old Royal Enfield Classic was also very torquey machine. In fact, at 28 Newton meters, the old Classic 350 had 1 Newton meter more torque than this machine right here. This one here produces 27 Newton meters at 4000 RPM, which is the same in terms of RPM as the previous Classic. The power here is of course more, 20.2 HP at 6100 RPM as opposed to 19.36 PS at a lower 5250 RPM of the previous machine. Another important thing is that while this is a long stroke motor, this is not as long a stroke motor as its predecessor, and there the stroke was 90 mm, while here it's 85.8 mm. So the low end tractability and the torquey character was more pronounced there. But having said that, for a really modern motor, this one also pulls at low revs really beautifully. And as I mentioned before, the power delivery is beautiful. It's spread very well across the rev range, and no matter which part of the rev band you are at, just twist the throttle and you will get response. There are no distinct surges, and you get a very even, very beautiful power delivery without any spikes, and the engine is very smooth. The firing of the engine is very consistent. You don't get any spikes, you don't get any jitters. It's really very beautifully done. There are no vibrations here. Only when the limiter cuts in, you can probably feel a very mild sensation somewhere around the tank, but that can completely be disregarded. I'll call this a completely vibe-free motorcycle by all means. Now we come to the important aspect of the ride and handling. And while this motorcycle handles beautifully, you can really take this motorcycle for long distance touring without much of a problem. I mentioned during my Meteor review that the feet forward position of that motorcycle was not very good for long distance riding, since the weight distribution on your feet was almost non-existent. This motorcycle fares a lot better, allows you to ride the pegs when you're going over bad surfaces. There is some pressure on your hand also, so the weight is much better distributed. And for a long distance touring perspective, this motorcycle is far better. So if you're looking to choose between the two motorcycles, my suggestion would be go with this one, because this motorcycle is better suited for long distance riding as well as for a little bit of soft roading, off-roading. We came here over this hill through a very bad patch of incline, and this motorcycle took it in its stride without much of a problem. So this is a more competent motorcycle that way. The suspension at the rear is 6-step adjustable, and as you can see here, it's at its softest setting, but this setting also was a little too firm for me when I was going over bad patches. So while this motorcycle rides beautifully when you're on a highway and smooth, well paved surfaces, when you're going over rough roads, over broken patches, you do feel a lot of vertical movement in your posterior, and it does feel a little bit uncomfortable. In my personal opinion, it could have been slightly softer. At least there should have been an option, and even at its softest setting, you can feel the jitters to an extent passing onto your posterior if you are riding over a bad patch. On mild undulations and smoothly paved highways, no problem, and it settles down rather well when you have a pillion on board, which brings us to the seat. Suitable for medium-ish journeys, not for very long journeys, but this is a very well cushioned seat. Both the seats up front and the rear are very well cushioned, and in fact this grab rail also is very functional. These two hooks here are also a good point to grab on, and in that sense the seats are perfectly usable, and this motorcycle can be ridden with a pillion for a reasonably long distance. Although pillion rider is someone who always suffers, gets the most amount of jolts, and long distance touring for a pillion, all these everyday motorcycles, is not advisable ever. Now the braking, as I mentioned, is fantastic. It's a huge improvement from where the Classic 350 of yore used to be. It's amazing in a relative manner. Obviously you cannot compare it to the sharpness of the modern sports motorcycles like the Apache RR 310 or some of the sportier Yamahas. However, for a retro style motorcycle, this stops rather well and does inspire confidence when you are doing speeds of 100, 110 on the highway. If there's an obstacle that comes in front of you, suddenly you feel prepared to stop in time, although this doesn't stop on a dime, but the braking is reassuring enough. About the handling, this motorcycle is nothing like the old Classic 350 and the Meteor, and this motorcycle differ by 10 mm in terms of ground clearance. The rake here is sharper. There you have a 26.8 degrees of rake, and here you have 26 degrees. So that brings about the 10 mm difference. And the chassis here is far more capable. You can really show this motorcycle a set of bends. It's not as squishy and as reluctant to be leaned over as the classic 350 of yore, and you really can rely on this motorcycle. In wet conditions these tires can perform a little bit better, but there is absolutely no comparison. Of course, it's a retro styled motorcycle. It's very heavy at 195 kgs. So of course it's not meant for corner carving, and I'm pretty sure that you know that. But within that framework, I really believe that Royal Enfield have made this motorcycle a far more capable handler as compared to its predecessor, and now it's a very reliable set of wheels if you're going around a set of bends. About the gear shifts are generally very smooth, and I don't have any complaints per se, but during some of the gear shifts, especially while downshifting from 4th to 3rd gear and 3rd to 2nd, there was a little bit of clankiness, and it wasn't present at all times. However, it could be felt at many occasions. So while the gearbox is very slick shifting, at some moments while downshifting I did feel a little bit of clankiness. Now let's talk about the cruising speeds as well as the top speed of this motorcycle. And you can cruise on this motorcycle in the 5th gear at about 90 to 95 kilometers per hour. It's not a motorcycle which is meant to be going very fast on. It loves to be ridden in a relaxed manner, and while the engine does not resist being revved hard, it's not the kind of motorcycle that you would want to be meting out that kind of treatment to. Although at 100 kilometers per hour it's not as relaxed as it is at 90 to 95 kilometers per hour. And as I mentioned, above the speeds of 100, it's not as intent as the Meteor. It has reluctance to cross 120 kilometers per hour mark. The top speed on this motorcycle should be about 120-21 on the speedo, and it does take some time before it reaches that mark. So in terms of top speed, nothing great to write home about, but everything else, how it reaches there, the refinement, the braking, the handling, all of that comes together beautifully to make the Royal Enfield Classic the motorcycle that it always deserved to be. And now with this complete overhaul, Royal Enfield have really made it a very commendable, very well engineered motorcycle, which I can very confidently now recommend to my friends and family. And it's a motorcycle which should now appeal to even those who care for solid engineering, refinement, and not just to the people who wanted the Classic for its looks and for the thump. So it's a far superior engineering package, and I really believe that Royal Enfield have done a stellar job of the new Classic 350, and it does not have the flaws of the Meteor, which is the stupid riding position. This one is much better, and you can ride it for a very long distance without any trouble. Now this motorcycle presents itself within the Royal Enfield Make It Yours program, and you can really customize it the way you want. And as a part of that customization, there are a lot of new accessories available for the new Classic 350, and let me just list out a few of those accessories for you. You now get black style alloy wheels, and these wheels will come with tubeless tires. You get a touring screen. You also get silver rider seat springs to give it a retro look and to provide a little bit more cushioning. The standard fitment is a dual seat. However, since single seats are more aspirational in most of the messaging, in most of the product presentation, Royal Enfield used the single seat, but the standard fitment is a dual seat. You also get backrests for the rear passenger in black and brown. There is a black touring mirror which looks nicer and gives the motorcycle an even nicer look. Then apart from that, you also get panniers, and you get pannier rails, a waterproofing inner bag. So all of these accessories can be used, and these accessories are designed by Royal Enfield. They are produced under strict quality control and come with 3 years of warranty, which is amazing. And you can be assured that these accessories are going to be as high in quality as the new modern Royal Enfield motorcycles are. So guys, that's the Royal Enfield Classic 350, a job fantastically well done. I love this motorcycle, and I really believe after having ridden it today for about 250 kilometers that this is the pick of the lot at this point in time. I really think that of all the motorcycles that are there, and I recommended the Honda, the highness before this, but now after having ridden this motorcycle, the Classic 350 has reclaimed its rightful position in the segment. The original is back with a bang. Now the prices have not been announced yet, but I assume that the pricing will not be very different from the existing Classic 350, and the prices once unveiled should range from 1.8 lakh rupees to 2.1 lakh rupees for this motorcycle. I really hope that you found the answers to all the questions that you had about this beautiful motorcycle, and if you liked our video, do not forget to like it, subscribe to Motoroids, press that bell icon, and do share this video with your friends and family so that they can also enjoy our long format detailed reviews. Until next time then, this is Amit Changani signing off. Rev hard, rev free, and ride safe.